The next section will be on carbohydrate quality, importance of food source. And our first speaker is Jenny Van Miller.
I'd like to start by thanking the chair people and also the conference organizers for this invitation, and also our sponsors, because we wouldn't be here without them. So first off, I know that this presentation might be a little provocative, and I hope that I won't offend anybody. I want to show my disclosures here on this slide. There's nothing that conflicts commercially with what I'm about to say. So this is the proposition that I'm putting to you today. It's a question that's occupied me for the last 6 to 12 months. What is it about our evolution? We think we are special. We think we're at the top of evolution. What made us that way? So we are kind of unique as a primate. Our phenotype compared to other large apes, we are efficiently bipedal. We walk on 2 feet. We have an exceptionally large brain, much larger than you would expect for our body weight. But paradoxically, we have a smaller gut, a smaller jaw, teeth are smaller. We've lost our canines, and we have a smaller face overall, which is indicative of an energy-dense diet. We have a prolonged childhood, which is thought to be a response to the fact that our brain takes an exceptionally long period of time to reach its adult size. And we have a high reproductive output compared to other apes. So what drove human evolution? And by human, I mean the apes that started to use stone tools are called Homo, and we're a member of Homo. So the hypothesis that dominates what caused evolution of humans is called man the hunter. It's not the only hypothesis, but it tends to dominate because people think, or the anthropologists think, hunting, the forces involved, the skills involved, the competitiveness, the communication involved an increasing brain size. Hunting, we needed special skills for, and it gave us meat. And so we've lionized meat and we've lionized protein. We think that we need a lot of protein, or anthropologists think we need a lot of protein. And it did give us a lot of nutrients. It gave us iron and all the long-chain fatty acids that are necessary for an increasing brain. But most of all, it gave us a novel energy source. Okay, humans actually have relatively low protein needs compared to other large apes. So on the x-axis, we have available protein in kilocalories, and on the y-axis, non-protein energy, which is fat plus carbohydrate. And what you can see there is that the animals that have the highest, apes that have the highest requirements are gorillas for protein as a percentage of total energy. The chimps are in the middle, and the chimpanzees and the humans have the lowest dietary requirement for protein. And on the other hand, in contrast to protein, we have very large, very high total energy requirements. So you can see there on the graphic that Homos are at the top with the gray line, followed by the chimpanzees, members of the Pan genus, followed by gorilla in green, and pongo, which is orangutans, are the lowest in terms of total energy expenditure expressed per unit of fat-free mass or lean tissue. So In brief, this is primate evolution. It starts 65 million years ago or so. We came where the mammals came after the dinosaurs were died out, and out of that evolution came primates. It was a warm, wet planet. It was tropical everywhere, even in the Antarctic and the Arctic. We quickly developed trichromatic color vision, which is red, green, blue color vision, especially to distinguish between red and green. We lost the ability to synthesize vitamin C very quickly. And I want you to think about why. And if you look at the teeth of anthropoids or large apes from 30 million years ago, these are fossilized teeth. You'll see that they have limited chipping, which is indicative of a soft rather than hard diet. And they have evidence of dental caries, which is indicative of another thing in the diet. So chimps and humans share a last common ancestor. So it's a reasonable question to ask, what do chimps eat? And we know because they've been well studied. So we know they eat a lot of ripe fruit. They are called ripe fruit specialists. Sometimes they're called omnivorous frugivores. So a frugivore is usually a ripe fruit eater, and they're called omnivorous because there are some animal foods in their diet. They absolutely adore figs, bananas, and boab fruit. If you give them a cucumber, they will throw it back at you. And I'm not joking, you can watch it on YouTube. Those sorts of fruits contain between 10 and 25% sugars per 100 grams because they are often semi-desiccated. They also eat leaves. They get their protein from leaves. They have leaves for lunch. They have flowers and nectar and honey in their diet as well. So if you think about fruit, fruit comes with bees, flowers, nectar, which varies in concentration between 10 and 50% sugars, and honey. Honey is desiccated nectar. They also hunt and kill monkeys. They share the kill with the rest of the group, which is what some of us humans do as well. Their animal foods is a small component of their diet, about 5 to 6%. So a question I had was, do chimps get dental caries? Wild chimpanzees? And the answer is yes. So this work comes from a group who specialize in looking at fossil teeth of primates. They looked at 1,300 teeth, 1,600 teeth. Many of them were females, most of them. And you can see 10% of the females, close to 10%, had dental caries. Why it's higher in females than males, your guess is better than or as good as mine. Maybe they like fruit more. Okay. Macronutrients in chimp diets have been studied by David Raubenheimer using the geometric framework. So they have shown that on average, males in captivity consume about 2,400 calories, similar to what an active male human might eat. Lactating females, a little more. 75% of their energy comes from carbohydrate, sometimes as high as 95%. And that carbohydrate is mostly sugars because they are ripe fruit specialists. They have a relatively low protein requirement, as I showed you on the previous slide, 15% of energy when you compare it with gorillas and orangutans. They are very clever animals. Especially the females. A study showed that 7 females and their offspring, they planned their breakfast time. They went to a special tree and made their nest late in the day. So they slept overnight in that nest, which was close to a tree that they could access early in the morning. So they went there, and they sometimes left in the dark to access this tree that they knew would have ripe fruit in the morning. And they are actually strategizing in order to access the ripest fruit. So one of the questions I had was, did frugivory, or the eating of mostly fruit as your energy source, drive brain growth? And I'm not the only person. I found that Catherine Milton, who is one of the experts in primate nutrition, and Richard Potts actually had the same hypothesis and the same question. So did the actual frugivory drive brain growth? Because we think about it, ripeness requires trichromatic vision. The ripest fruits have the highest sugar content, and by the way, the highest vitamin C content. You need imagination to think, I'm going to find this fruit. I've got to remember its size, its shape. I've got to distinguish it from the leaves around. I've got to use cognitive mapping of the forest. I've got to remember which month this particular species ripens and where it ripens. So all year round in a tropical forest, you have fruit ripening of various species, hundreds of species. So you also need to plan and strategize, as I've given you the example, to outcompete your competitors. So I want you to contrast this with the man, the hunter hypothesis. Man, the hunter, the animals are all the same color. They're just in front of you. You have to chase them. And that, of course, requires energy. Okay, frugivory actually, and this is the paper that set me along this path, frugivory actually predicts brain size. So in 150 species of primate, this group, Alex Decassian, showed that specifically frugivore have larger brains than folivores, folivores being the leaf eaters. And in fact, frugivores had a higher brain size than the omnivorous groups and the mixed groups. So I don't have a graphic because their paper's full of statistics. So unfortunately, I can't show you. But brain size in humans has increased. I'd love to invert this graph. It's increased exponentially over the last few million years. So on the y-axis, we have 3.5 million years. On the x-axis, we have endocranial volume. This paper showed that actually you could divide it into 4 phases, 2 rapid and 2 static phases. And I want you to notice that the last 750,000 years was a phase that was rapid, okay? The earlier rapid phase was between 2 and 1.5 million years ago. Okay, this is the traditional view of brain growth increase in various species, beginning with Australopithecus afarensis, which is down here. Can you see my cursor? No. Okay, so Australopithecus afarensis is Lucy, the little 1 meter high ape who's walking on 2 legs, and she's made famous. And you can find her actual skeleton in the Paris Museum of Natural History. And what you can see here is that it's not just brain growth that's increased, it's actually the access to the diameter of the carotid canal is increased 6-fold. In fact, our delivery of oxygen, the delivery of nutrients, of glucose in particular, has increased 6-fold to our very big brain. So our enormous brain is actually very greedy. It's not particularly remarkable in its structure. They used to say it was. We used to say we have a very big frontal cortex. But actually this lady, Susanna, what's happened there? You can't see it. You are sharing. You know what to do here. Oh, now you can. Thank you. Our brain is big, but it's actually not that remarkable, according to this researcher who's actually gone to the trouble of counting the neurons using a special technique in different parts of our brain and those of other primates. So there are no more neurons than you'd expect for our size. In fact, she says we're just a scaled up primate. It's a bit of a come down, isn't it? It's similar cellular composition and similar metabolic cost in a chimpanzee and a human. The metabolic cost is about 5 to 6 milligrams. There's one behind me. One behind me, sorry, 5 or 6 milligrams per 100 grams of brain tissue. Okay, so if you can do the maths in your head, you can work out what our 24-hour grams of glucose consumption is. Okay, the energy cost of an adult brain is about 20% of our basal metabolic rate, even though it just weighs about 1.2 kilos, 2% of our body weight. But did you know that a child's brain uses 66% of its basal metabolic rate? Same paper, Aronoff et al. That 66%, it's not responding. Where's Sabrina? There it is. Oh, now I'm out. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. That's when I tried to use the cursor.
Yeah, let's try this one instead.
Okay, it should be okay. Thank you. We're way ahead now.
There we go.
Okay, thank you, thank you. But, so no wonder children have a high sweet consumption and a high sweet preference when you consider this fact. So the trouble is, it's not just the brain. If you have a pregnant woman, you have a fetus, a placenta, which is quite demanding of glucose as well. The baby, the fetus, grows on the mother's blood glucose, but so do the red cells have an obligatory requirement of 20 grams of glucose a day. The kidney, medulla, and of course, hardworking muscles use primarily glucose. 2 minutes. So what did early hominins eat? These are the lines of evidence. First of all, I have to say, we don't really know what they ate, okay? But we can use circumstantial evidence, hapadats, isotopes in teeth and bones. We can look at the teeth morphology to learn a lot about diet. We can look at the gut morphology to learn about diet. And we can also look at fire and cooking and when it came along. And we can also look at the genes, such as AMY1, which is salivary amylase gene. So the declining global temperature, you can see there, that's 3.5 million years on the x-axis. And you can see that we've gradually been cooling, but also we've had these huge fluctuations. So if anything, humans can adapt to these wide fluctuations in temperature. But the consequences of global cooling have been less plant growth because there's less warmth and there's less water. There's a decline in carbohydrate intake. There's more grasslands and therefore more herbivores occupying the grasslands. There's an increase in animal foods, a change in this ratio of isotopes that tells you we're either eating the grass or we're eating the animals. And there's a lot of anthropologists who think we're eating the grass or the underground storage organs. But I'll tell you something in a minute. I don't think they're eating the underground storage organs. So fire is relatively recent in human evolution. In fact, there's great controversy over when it appeared, as consistent as in terms of hearths for cooking. So certainty comes 400,000 years ago. So cooked starch enters the human diet relatively recently in human evolution, 10% of the time. So the advent of cooking is important because raw starch is indigestible. Cooked starch, on the other hand, is easily digestible, and it has obviously a glycemic response. It's a completely new source of glucose. It increases the glycemic index and glycemic load of the total diet because starch is digested all to glucose. There's no fructose present. And of course, at the same time, the AMY1 gene duplicated and duplicated and duplicated. In sometimes it was up to 20 copies, but in average, there's 8 copies compared to 2 in chimpanzees. So I believe that there is circumstantial evidence that starch replaced declining intake of sugars in fruit. And of course, as we've seen before in the first presentation today, we can taste sugar. But did you know we can taste starch? That we learn to taste starch, and it's not just in the tongue. We can taste it all down our small intestine. And this is imprinted by the glycemic response. So these glycemic responses lead to responses in the brain, including satiety, but also pleasure, opioid circuits. And those opioid circuits actually can override satiety circuits. So there's always room for dessert, was what we said. So these are my conclusions. We know little about diet in human evolution, but we can actually make a good guess. If frugivory was where we came from, then we ate a lot of sugars. I'd like you to do the calculation in your head per kilogram of body weight. A large brain uses an exorbitant amount of glucose. Natural sugars fueled this bigger brain for a long period of human evolution. So I would like to end with the statement, sugars financed early human evolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And because of time, we just move on to the next speaker, which will be Joan Salvin from the US. And her talk will be on where do traditional starchy staples foods like potatoes and rice fit. Joan?
Well, unfortunately, Joanne was not able to join us in person. She wasn't feeling well, but through the miracles of technology and with fingers crossed, she will present online.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that the wonders of Zoom allow people in sick bay to still participate. I really appreciate the invitation to be at this meeting. It is my favorite meeting, and I love the meals and all the fun. So I'm very sorry I'm missing that. So here are my affiliations. I'm a professor in the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences at the University of Minnesota. And I was a member of the Dietary Guidelines Committee in 2010. These are some of my disclosures. I work with a lot of food companies and commodity groups because I believe that's the way to get things done. So I appreciate that. I also grew up and owned the Slave and Sisters Farm in Walworth, Wisconsin. So we're going to talk about carbohydrates. It's great to be in a group of people that love carbohydrates. So where are they in a healthy dietary patterns? And then as we want to move forward to carbohydrate quality, can we have a more broad discussion and agreement on what carbohydrate quality is? And then what kind of metrics are we going to use? Quality metrics and how to move forward in dietary guidance to include carbohydrate staples like starchy vegetables and rice in those recommended patterns. I like to go from this, Janet King presented this once, and I thought, this is really useful because we go from science all the way to eating lunch. And to get along the way, sometimes when we stall out and have problems and people don't disagree, when they disagree on things, we have problems moving on. So over in the blue books, there are the dietary reference intakes, which are kind of established science for nutrients. And in the carbohydrates, we'll talk a little more about that as we go on, but they don't change that much. They're kind of established. So as we try to move on, it's like, well, this is what we know. And a lot of that information was from animal studies and other ways of learning. So we're going to start there. In the middle are the dietary guidelines. And I know remember the DRIs are both Canadian and US based. So Canada and the US got together to come up with the dietary reference intakes. In the middle here is the dietary guidelines for Americans, first the advisory committee report, and then the dietary guidelines, which we're expecting soon to come out again. So that also affects policy based on science. So we're taking science, trying to update it, integrate it into policy. And then eventually we have to tell people how to eat, what to eat. So my plate is this idea, if you put together this variety of foods, you'll get all the nutrients you need. So I love to have people that have thought greatly about metabolism and human nutrition. So we know humans have survived on a wide range of diets, mostly reflecting access to food supply. If they were hunters, if there were things growing, how did they get food? Could they fish? All these things really determine what was available to them. No Costco back then. So we know that protein needs are based on ideal body weight. So the RDAs for protein, 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. So that's what we got to get first. Not only does that give us calories, but that gives us the amino acids we need to grow and produce muscle. But then carbohydrates and fats, it really isn't as important as probably we've gotten to. So if you go back traditionally, and I really appreciated Jenny's discussion of, we don't know exactly, but we can go back and try to determine that some of the people that lived on whale and fish got most of their calories from fat, while African diets where people were just out scrounging for whatever they could find is going to be mostly carbohydrates. So we know there's a huge range, and people, depending, as long as they could get their protein and the calories they need, they could do quite well. So the trick to good nutrition, get diets that contain the right number of calories, enough protein, and then all these other vitamins, minerals, and fluids that come along with the foods that we consume. So carbohydrates is the basis of most modern diets. About half the calories consumed by Americans and pretty much around the world, just because it's pretty inexpensive and it's pretty acceptable. So just from a practical sustainability point, carbohydrates really are king. They're a readily available source of energy. And then nutrients coming along, which you heard about fruits, you're going to hear about some of the other whole foods that are high in carbohydrates, bring those nutrients along. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this just because this was a review paper we'd put together, one of my former students, on carbohydrate quality measures and trying to move along that continuum, dietary reference intakes, RDAs, dietary guidance, all of these types of things. So what is the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for carbohydrates? It is 45 to 65% of calories coming from carbohydrates. And I do a lot of work in the keto world, and I have a lot of friends over in that world. And these recommendations really get in the way of, can't we go down lower? Well, the DRIs say we should be in that range. Why is it that range? Just because kind of it can be. Like for protein, we don't need to go over 10 to 15%. And then carbs and fat, we can switch it up anyway. But because of the big emphasis on low-fat diets over time, we're kind of stuck with that recommendation. So most of our calories need to come from carbohydrates. The dietary guidelines for Americans then in 2015 came up with a recommendation of less than 10% of calories from added sugar. Now, if you go into the DRIs, they're the upper limit. Do we have upper limits for added sugars? It's actually 25% of total calories, which is only based on dilution of calcium. So when we try to put together recommendations and have a holistic view, sometimes we do come up with unintended consequences. And I appreciate the other speakers today bringing those up. We do have an RDA for carbohydrates in adults, which is 130 grams per day. So if you do the math on that, it's not very many calories, but as you just heard from our previous speaker, the brain needs carbohydrate, kidney, all of these, the nervous system needs carbohydrates. So the recommendation was we are going to have this low level, don't go below this amount. You can see that goes up for children, goes up for during pregnancy. Of course, my life is fiber, so we have an adequate intake of fiber, which is 28 grams per day, and generally we only consume about half of that. And then we get into recommendations for whole foods. So these are the things that will bring those nutrients together. So make half your plate fruits and vegetables, make half your grains whole grains, eat this many equivalents of whole grains, Eat 1 to 2 cups of fruit per day. Eat 1 to 3 cups of vegetables per day. And these recommendations, as you'll see, are generally problematic. So this is the calculation that we did to try to figure out in the US, where are we getting our carbohydrates from? And not surprisingly, even though we just talked about eat more fruits, eat more vegetables, eat more whole grains, most of what people are getting are grain products. So grain products, because that is the basis of most diets, small amounts of vegetables, small amounts of fruits, dairy products with their lactose also coming through, the legumes, nuts, some of this area, pretty small intakes and then just sugars and sweeteners, pretty high intakes. And remember, this is all put together. So sugar, and this is the usual problem we get into data too. It's like, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? No, we tend not to. But even putting these things into categories is difficult too, because in the My Plate, if you look at things like legumes, pulses, beans, they can go between the vegetable plate or the protein part of the plate, depending on when you put those diets together. So my dietetics thing and working as a dietitian, first in life, trying to put things into categories and have good metric systems is quite challenging. I use this for my class just so people know where carbohydrates come from. And this is just from the plate. So you see the different parts of the plate here in color, and we're looking at grams of carbohydrate in different foods. So a couple points I want to point out right here is that protein really doesn't, that protein group doesn't have a lot of carbohydrate in it, unless there's some seeds, peanut butter, and kidney beans. Obviously, those are going to have quite a bit of starch in them. The dairy group, if you are taking in milk, you're taking in plain yogurt, you're going to get lactose. That many grams in that group. If you're taking in cheese, you're not going to. So it really varies depending on your serving. Fruits are sugar, right? Banana has a little bit of starch, but otherwise they are sugar. Interesting in the vegetable group, just the differences in a cup of different vegetables, right? So a cup of corn versus a cup of broccoli, much differences in calories. So I appreciate the discussion we've had here today that if you don't control calories in this, you're really not helping yourself out. How many calories do you get? A medium potato, similar to a banana in composition. And then the grain group, some differences there too, but a big source of carbohydrate in our diet. So I just want to point out the dietary guidelines for Americans also come up with nutrients of concern. Calcium, vitamin D, potassium, and dietary fiber. I've linked that there just because I'm talking about carbohydrates there. And on the bottom, added sugars less than 10% of your calories per day. Generally, when we chase a number like this, we run into unintended consequences of not doing what we want to do, but those are goals that everybody has to meet when they're putting together diets. But what you see is a shift from individual foods and ingredients to healthy eating patterns, which is what we want to do. But whenever we do this, a lot of times we run into unintended consequences, trying to do good and ending up in a bad place. I just wanted to mention for the whole grains, some of these recommendations are very practical. At least half your grains should be whole grains, spend a lot of time there. But also the enrichment process, we forget about that. How do we bring nutrients along? So in the US, we enrich dairy products with vitamin A and D, and we enrich grain products with iron, 3 B vitamins, and folic acid since 1998. So when those go into refined grains, which are essentially saying don't consume those anymore because we want you to eat whole grains. So making sure that there's some balance there, not to exclude. But most Americans fall way below those recommendations for whole grains, and we exceed refined grains. So some of the things, what do people like to eat? They tend to be the refined grains. I always have to bring protein in here because you don't need to eat animal products to get protein, but this is a really hard thing to study because most people in the US do get animal protein. So if about 2/3 of the protein does come from high quality animal protein. So do we have a protein deficiency? We do not. A lot of the world relies on plant proteins from grains and vegetables that they have to put together. And as people get more money, they tend to eat more animal foods that have more protein. So this is the hard thing in trying to look at what are the effects of animal protein versus plant protein. When you bring together all that plant protein, you're bringing together a lot of phytochemicals, fibers, and other things. And this is a review article that we wrote on plant proteins when we focus on getting rid of the bad guys. So let's get rid of the added sugar. We get rid of the solid fats. We have unintended consequences of reducing high quality protein and these nutrients of concern: calcium, iron, vitamin D, potassium, fiber and folate. And those will vary across the life cycle too. So in kids, we want to make sure that they are just appreciated, that thing about kids growing and the need for them to get all those nutrients. This is my life, so it's been my business. It's a great place to be. It really is a marker of a healthy diet, but in and of itself, it has roles once we isolate it and put it back in. But we forget that when we're looking at the prospective cohort studies, we're looking at eating foods that are high in fiber. Thing that's interesting about them is they work in the gut. They don't work above that, although they have some effects. And I believe there's a nutrient, 2002 supports me on that. It's regulated 28 grams, current daily value. We have health claims in the US and our intake is only half of what it should be. I like to use this slide from my book also, just because of digested, absorbed gets into us, the undigested on the other side gets down into the large intestine, gets fermented by the intestinal microbiota. And remember, this is not like, there's not like this ends. All of a sudden, we're making short chain fatty acids that get absorbed for energy. We're making vitamins that get absorbed. Some of these intestinal secretions are also getting fermented. So this is a process that's going on all the time. And it's actually kind of hard to study because you got to collect fecal samples. So it's nice to see some of the studies that were presented, people willing to go after that and collect some fecal samples. So fiber works throughout the gut, so affects chewing, saliva production, decreases absorption of different nutrients, changes in gut hormones. Been in this world for a long time, and all of a sudden people care about GLP-1s and what fiber could do for you. It slows down gastric emptying, so it keeps things there longer, and this whole fermentation process, the magic of fermentation. I want to present, this is one of my students that worked on this project, that beyond insoluble fiber, bioactive compounds in plant foods. So there's fiber we can analyze, but to analyze that, we have to take everything else out. So when we see protective properties of plant foods, it may not just be the fiber, it may be something else. Interesting too, this the idea of fruit versus leaves, roots, stems that we just heard about. It does vary a lot. There's going to, how much fiber is in these compounds, what kind of fiber is there. But most of these bioactives are associated with that insoluble fiber content. How much do people eat? And love the discussion of how much do people eat. There's some data, 100 grams of dietary fiber, which beyond the fiber that comes in is going to deliver these bioactives that may be more important than the fiber itself, as those things actually get absorbed and have biological effects in our diet. I wanted to throw this in just because this is my whole world right now. Many healthy carbohydrate foods are ultra processed. Breads, yogurt, canned fruits and vegetables, frozen fruits and vegetables. Also those fortified grains that provide essential nutrients are ultra processed. All isolated plant proteins are ultra processed. So if we could come up with some definitions that say this is appropriate processing for these products that we do want to get into our food supply. Okay, so why do we need another metric? Well, this is, it seems like we ought to come up with something that works, but foods are so different. So I think if you look at what's been available in the past, it's usually fiber to added sugars, right? And that makes sense. Those are the two things that have been teed up. So the good guys and the bad guys, we work it out. But a lot of foods, they don't really help us much. They don't capture much. So we would like to have a metric that works across different food groups. So what should it do? Intrinsic carbohydrate food qualities, be based on accurate, reliable, and publicly available data. Use food group and category specific, which is the way we put together recommendations. Align with dietary guidance tools and policy. And as those change, obviously, we're always chasing that too. It be expandable, but really be culturally inclusive, translatable, and easy to use. Things that people are already eating, don't make them feel that these are bad foods. If our metric says this is bad because it's high in added sugar, don't ever eat it. You just heard, we don't want those messages out there. So I don't have time to present all of this, but this idea of what in this, and I have some extra slides that people can go into here, but that the idea that beans, vegetables, fruit are the top scoring carbohydrates. And in this system, what we did is we gave credit for fiber, obviously, but we also put in those nutrients of concern, potassium, and making sure that that data actually gets incorporated into that. When we look at the whole grains, the grain category is really different. So we had to use some different ways of moving that around. Some of ready-to-eat cereals, oatmeal, and whole grain breads and crackers actually are high quality carbohydrate foods. If we look at, does it correlate with other things? It does, because it uses some of the other systems for that. But we would like to propose that metrics of carbohydrate quality have to include whole grains, potassium, and sodium, in addition to sugar and fiber, give us some more nuanced information and guidance for culturally diverse and heterogeneous population. All right, I'm going to finish on this before I go into more detail on this. And I like to say, you know, for consumers, I didn't appreciate before how important these guidance are, because they affect policy. So in 1916, USDA did their first food guidance document, and it was for food for young children, which is really where it's at, right? We got to get it right for kids. Absolutely important. And some of the MAHA stuff is quite frightening, but I believe there's opportunity there. So focus on children might be good for all of us. The basic 7 of the 1940s was really good because the vegetable groups were split. So the starchy vegetables that have more calories and more starch were actually put in a different category. And then as we got into the basic 4, really same idea of this, very similar to my plate. But 1992, I think, is really useful, this idea that we build it up from the bottom, that we can eat starchy and high carbohydrate foods, whole foods, and we want to build that up. So with the grain category, fruits, vegetables, and then the other higher expensive, more higher in protein, we don't need that much of it. So we can use that and share that with the world. All right, so an eating pattern is more than sum of its parts. So rather than micromanaging our way into giving out bad advice, if we can have a more holistic view, it will really help us out. And remember this idea too, that what is on this plate here is so we can bring in 2,000 calories, all the nutrients you need from the foods you choose. So conclusions, I really appreciate your attention. Carbohydrate staples that are popular throughout the world, rice, wheat, potato, are the top 3 most important food crops in the world. And growing up on a farm and still being involved in a farm, making sure that these productive crops can be put into foods that people actually want to eat. They tend to be the least expensive food crops. They are culturally important. So looking at people's culture of foods that are popular things, and they provide other nutrients besides just starch, digestible carbohydrate, potassium, dietary fiber, and then the enrichment process, depending on the country, what enriched nutrients are we bringing through in those products. I also wanted to talk about the physiological property of nutrients and components found in carbohydrate foods, fiber, whole grains, bioactives really deserve increased attention. I believe everything happens in the gut. Just this synergy and this idea of affecting the gut. So really important, very difficult, and most of the place people don't like to study, but really important. And just overall, a holistic, non-reductionist approach for defining carbohydrate quality using a standardized research-based metric consistent with the dietary guidelines for Americans and other dietary guidance documents would improve public health outcomes. I mentioned I have additional slides here that talk more about our carbohydrate quality assessment tools. They're publications that I presented last year too. So happy to take questions, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Joanna. We will have the panel discussion at the end of all the presentations. The next presenter, unfortunately, Gabriele was not able to attend, but his colleague has agreed to step up. Ledgarda Bozzetto, please.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. And I bring greetings from Gabriele Riccardi that unfortunately cannot be here with us today. And I will present on his behalf a quick overview of the relationship between whole grain, fruit, and past consumption and cardiometabolic health. I have no conflict. Okay, I have no conflict of interest to disclose. Okay, as we begin, we should highlight that current intakes of dietary fiber, whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and pulses are below the recommended threshold. The low consumption of whole grains is largely due to the widespread intake of bread and bakery products that are made with refined flour. This kind of flour is produced by removing the outer layer of the grain kernel, so the brain, which is the richest part in the fibers, antioxidants, and a lot of other beneficial components. Sorry, but okay. And maybe it is because of these components that strong and consistent evidences show an inverse relationship between daily whole grain intake and cardiovascular disease mortality, as shown by these two large prospective studies. And consistently, this meta-analysis of prospective studies also show an inverse relationship with the type 2 diabetes incidence. Possible mechanism behind these beneficial effects include, of course, dietary fiber, their fermentative and prebiotic effects, and also metabolic effects of other beneficial compounds, such as polyphenols and betaine. As for dietary fiber, there is compelling evidence that show that the higher is the daily intake of dietary fiber, the lower is the incidence of cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, and type 2 diabetes. And consistently, this meta-analysis also show that in people with type 2 diabetes, daily intake of fiber is inversely related with total and cardiovascular disease mortality. How fiber can mediate this effect? There is evidence that dietary fiber can act as proper prebiotic agents since they enhance the growth of beneficial bacteria species such as Akkermansia bifidobacterius that are able to produce short-chain fatty acids, which in turn are able to modulate almost all pathways involved in glucose regulation, thus determining a reduction of fasting and postprandial glucose. This was also shown by the HEADPAT project, a randomized controlled trial that aimed to compare a refined cereals rich diet with a whole grain cereals rich diet. And this trial showed that after 3 months of treatment, after the whole grain cereals, but not the refined cereals diet, there was a significant reduction of postprandial insulin and triglyceride levels. In the context of this study, it was also observed that changes in the intake of cereal fiber significantly correlated with changes in fasting propionate levels. And when propionate levels was put in relation with the postprandial glucose response, it was observed that participants with fasting propionate levels above the median of the whole cohort had significantly lower insulin postprandial levels. This suggesting that the beneficial effect of whole grain is probably mediated also by the propionate concentrations. In the context of whole grain diet, whole grain study, also a metabolomic evaluation was performed. And this analysis show that after whole grain diet, betaine compounds, phenolic compounds, as well as other beneficial lipid species increased significantly more with whole grain diet compared with the control diet. Also, in this case, when we put data on betaine compound in relationship with the postprandial metabolism, postprandial changes, we were able to see a relationship with between beta-in and insulin and triglyceride levels, being in the highest tertile of beta-in concentration, the lowest levels of insulin and triglyceride, suggesting also in this case a possible role of this component. And the same applied to the concentration of phenolic compounds. So it was possible to see the same relationship. There is some troubles there. But what about pulses? Also for pulses, but although not so strong for whole grains, exists evidence for a protective relationship in relation to cardiovascular disease incidence. And it has been shown by several umbrella meta-analyses that some of you know very well. And in this case, the consumption of whole legume was associated with a 8% reduction of cardiovascular disease incidence. And in another similar meta-analysis that only included non-soy legume, the legume intakes was also related with a reduction in type 2 diabetes incidence. And in type 2 diabetes patients, the consumption of legume was also inversely related with the blood pressure levels. So in this study, we observed that people in the highest quantile of legume intake has significantly lower blood pressure levels. And when we perform a multivariate linear regression looking at predictors of this beneficial effect in terms of nutrients compounds, we observed that fiber was the best predictor when legumes were not included in the analysis. When we included in the analysis also the legumes, fibers disappear as best predictors and legumes became the best one. So suggesting that also in this case, this relationship, beneficial relationship with blood pressure is mediated by fiber. Similar evidence are also available for fruit. In this systematic review, very recent review, it has been shown that the overconsumption of fruit, also in this case, is related with the reduction incidence. Sorry, but there is some trouble with the slide. There is a reduction of incidence of cardiovascular disease with it has been shown with a moderate level of certainty, and still there is also evidence of an inverse relationship, dose effect relationship between fruit consumption and risk of a metabolic syndrome. How this can be mediated? Of course, we speak a lot about the sugar in the fruit, but we know that fruit is very rich in polyphenols, so antioxidant. And in this trial, we compared the effect of a diet naturally rich in polyphenols coming from different food sources, including, of course, fruits such as blueberries and oranges. And we observed that the high polyphenols diet compared with the control diet determined an improvement of glucose tolerance and an improvement of insulin secretion, the early phase of insulin secretion in patients at high cardiovascular risk. The same diet determined a reduction of postprandial lipids, mainly triglyceride in plasma and large VLDL, and also this diet significantly improved the oxidative stress in the body, as shown by the reduction of isoprostans in the urines, here shown in blue. So, in summary, the association between whole grain consumption and a low risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease is strong and consistent. Supportive evidence is also available for the association between fruit and legume consumption with the incidence of cardiometabolic events. Different biological mechanisms that might explain this association have been proposed, and some of them have been shown to be operative. And as take-home messages, we can take that a diet high in plant-based foods, including cereals, and particularly whole grain, fruit, and legumes, is associated with a lower cardiometabolic risk and less environmental impact than a Western diet presently utilized in many European countries. So increase the consumption of whole grain foods, at least 1-2 servings a day, fruit 2-3 servings a day, legumes 3-4-7 week should be recommended to the general population irrespective of age, gender, and physiological state. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Bossetto, for keeping the time and taking in a little bit time as well. Now, the next speaker will be Livia Augustine from Italy. Does pasta behave like refined starch? And is there a need for a new fiber definition? Livia, please.
Just to let everyone know as well, we know about the screen. The AV team is trying to fix it, and I apologize for the disturbance.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to the organizers. It's a beautiful location and a beautiful city. Does pasta behave like a refined grain? Is there a need for a new fiber definition? Well, obviously, we think so. We did this work together. It's a collaboration with Professor Marianne von Ginkel from Brighton University in UK and Professor Peter Ellis from King's College London, UK. So we worked on a, so this is not working or it's working? Try that, okay. That?
This should work.
Oh, that too, okay. It is a collaboration, as I said, and we wrote a review. The title you can see at the top. It is been in the process of publication. What we try to do in this review is to put together the health effects and the supramolecular structure characteristics of pasta, which is probably something new to put together on these two aspects of a food. So let's go back to, I guess, Nutrition 101. Lutgarda just showed a similar picture. Basically, the grain kernel, it's made of 3 components, main components. So approximately 83% is the endosperm. The outer layer, the bran layers represent about 14% and 3% the wheat germ. In these components, you can find in the endosperm mainly starch, but also proteins and some fiber. The wheat germ has is the reproductive machine, so it has the embryo, polyunsaturated fats, vitamin E, among others. And the 6 layers, you can see them listed here. They contain dietary fiber and micronutrients and some antioxidants, as was shown in previous pictures. Inside the fiber, this is the cell wall, so this is the dietary fiber. Inside it, you can see various structures which can be pectins, these lines, green lines that you see held together by calcium. You have these tubules which are called cellulose microfibrils. Inside these, you have cellulose crystallites. They're held together by hemicelluloses, which are the sort of Z-shaped orange structures. So this is what's going on inside the fiber. And when we talk about cell wall, we talk about the dietary fiber. So what is a refined grain? According to the current definition by USDA, a milled grain, it is a milled grain devoid of fiber and germ, leaving behind the endosperm or starch. An example is white flour, and foods are shown on the right made of white flour, such as bread and pasta. Refined grains are considered unhealthy carbohydrate sources, unfortunately, without distinction. Pasta is classified as an unhealthy plant food also by the scientific literature. However, the FDA considers pasta as a good source of fiber. So are all refined grains equal? The current definition of refined grains that you have just seen does not consider the three-dimensional aspects of food, so the molecular structure of food. So if you have, for example, the endosperm, the starch, right, finely milled, you completely lose the cell structures. But if they're coarsely milled, you can still find intact or partial intact cell structures, and this may affect also physiologic responses and therefore health responses. For example, with semolina, the endosperm of coarsely milled durum wheat flour, which is called semolina flour, contains many intact cell walls, and it is a coarse type of milling. And inside the cell walls, you can find nutrients and micronutrients, which could potentially be released in the gut because obviously the packaging, the fiber is not digested in the upper gastrointestinal tract. So there could be also an effect in the lower gut, in the colon, which is something we would like also to study more closely. But to look at how these structures look like in semolina on the left side, these are pictures actually courtesy of Dr. Sugidni from UK. On the left side, you can clearly see this picture basically confirms the intact nature of many of the cells within the larger particle size of semolina sample, which are 500 microns. You can see this is a slice, so obviously they seem open, but in reality they are closed, the cells, the cell walls. And on the right side, you can see still durum wheat semolina, but finely milled to less than 125 microns, and you don't see these structures. There are no intact cell structures of the fiber. This other picture published by Peter Ellis, a very nice electron microscopic pictures. They show on the left side the semolina versus the right side the refined flour. And you can see the red arrows indicate the actual cell walls. They are a little bit darker, so that's how you can see them. But there are also chunks. You can see there are chunks of coarse flour semolina. On the right side, you can see it's all amalgamated. You don't see clearly the complete structures and the cell walls, the intact cell walls. You don't see that. So after many of these pictures, after studying this aspect, the three-dimensional structure of carbohydrates, a new proposed classification of dietary fiber has been suggested by Marianne von Ginkel. The 4-tier classification of dietary fiber, which could be an adjunct to obviously the current dietary fiber definition. So these 4 levels are intact, clustered, ruptured, and refined. Intact means the plant foods are completely or largely intact, like tree nuts or legumes or fruit. Clustered means there are clusters of cells, intact cells, such as in semolina, couscous, or stone ground grains. And ruptured, it means they're a little bit more milled, and therefore there are no clusters, but probably still some intact cells. And refined, it's complete loss of the dietary fiber matrix and some complete loss of fiber in some situations. You can also see in this review, we also went to look at how the packaging of this starch can affect. How does it look like, first of all, under the electron microscope? And this is how it looks like. Very close packing of the grains. These are starch grains in white. And you can see also the intact cell walls around. And this happens in semolina pasta or semolina flour, which is a coarse flour. This tight packing makes it difficult for water to enter and also for amylase to access and digest the starch. Another picture shows the gluten structure, which is also very dense in semolina on the left side picture, and on the right you see the gluten in bread dough, wheat bread dough. this tight structure also can be can hinder the entrance of water, hinder gelatinization and digestive enzymes and digestion. And so these reasons, for these reasons, it's believed that pasta has a low glycemic index, which has been studied a lot by David Jenkins and also by Furio Brighenti in Italy, testing the Italian pasta. It seems like spaghetti actually has the lowest glycemic index, so it does not rise. It does not increase the blood glucose as much as, for example, whole wheat bread. That's about half. And this can have an effect on glycemia overall, on hemoglobin A1C, on cardiovascular risk factors. We saw many studies that looked, in fact, observational studies that looked at how pasta is associated with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And body weight does not seem to be affected, as Sanders and Joanne Slavin showed in a review in 2023, published in 2023. There is no negative effect on body weight. In fact, there seems to be beneficial effects in many studies. I don't think I have much time to go through. How much time do I have to go through these studies? Okay. In any case, these studies, one of the studies that I mentioned showed that pasta reduced the risk of CVD, but no effect on type 2 diabetes. I think we know this study very well, Simin study, where they looked also at food substitution analysis, where pasta if pasta replaced fried potatoes, it showed clearly a reduction in relative risk of diabetes, stroke, and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And when pasta replaced white bread, it also reduced stroke. This is the study by Riccardi's group, Gabriele Riccardi, showing that pasta consumption is not associated with the worsening of glycemic control, BMI, adiposity, obesity, and major cardiovascular disease risk factors in the TOSCA study, which is in people with type 2 diabetes. We looked also at randomized controlled trials of pasta and cardiometabolic risk factors. And although it's hard to read this, but just to say that at the bottom, you can see the dot shows the intervention statistically modified the outcome in a health beneficial direction, while the dotted line showed that the outcome was evaluated, but no significant results were found. So you see a lot of dots, some dotted lines, and where there is nothing, that variable was not studied. So particularly, you can also see for postprandial glucose, for particularly for blood pressure and also blood lipids. There are lots of dots and no negative results for cardiometabolic risk factors. Also in cancer, pasta and breast cancer and colorectal cancer risk have been studied. It was a collaboration with Carlo Lavecchia and Silvia Franceschi in Italy. It's good to look at, obviously, the effect of pasta in all countries, since in Italy we consume pasta even every day. And these studies showed on the left that pasta was not associated with breast and colorectal cancer risk. And these were a lot of cases, more than 2,500 cases of breast cancer, more than 2,000 cases of colorectal cancer as well. And bread, however, was directly associated with both breast cancer risk and colorectal cancer risk. Spaghetti, in a study, American study of the American population, spaghetti showed an improvement in diet quality in the US population, in more than 10,000 American adults, representative of the American population. It's a cross-sectional study, but it showed that higher spaghetti consumption was associated with 10 to 13% of dietary fiber, approximately 2 grams per day. And an increase of 5.6% in the Hay score, which means a higher quality of the diet. This is versus macaroni and cheese. Macaroni and cheese has is made of highly refined flour, not semolina flour. And we know, I think we all know now that that pasta is is a staple of the Mediterranean diet, which is a diet recognized for its health and longevity characteristics. It's actually at the base of the Mediterranean diet pyramid, together with vegetables and fruit. So the take-home messages are that food structures and its three-dimensional matrix is a characteristic of foods that can impact on human health and can be as relevant as food composition, which is not always a predictor of postprandial glycemia, as the glycemic index studies have clearly shown. And if Joanne Slavin may still be listening, perhaps the food structure, the three-dimensional structure, may be considered as a component of the carbohydrate quality index, which right now it is not part of. Pasta is another example, basically, of why food structure is important. Despite having lost the briny layer, the outside layers, semolina pasta does not have the negative health effects associated with many highly refined carbohydrates. Therefore, it is not an unhealthy plant food. We cannot say it's an unhealthy plant food by scientific evidence. Also, we know that pasta is made of durum with semolina, which has intact cell walls, thanks to all the beautiful pictures from Peter Ellis and colleagues. And it is a good source of fiber, according to US FDA. And by chemical and structural analysis, pasta, therefore, is not a refined carbohydrate. So in summary, pasta within a healthy diet is associated with lower risk of chronic diseases, reduces cardiometabolic risk factors in RCTs, does not increase body weight, and is a vehicle for healthy and tasty food ingredients like olive oil, tomatoes, garlic, onion, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. So if you think about, should pasta be included with unhealthy carbohydrate foods and unhealthy plant foods, as you see in this picture? Or should it be thought as a healthy dish, which it is within the Mediterranean diet? And these are typical pasta dishes made mainly with vegetarian sauces. Of course, also there are fish sauces, seafood and fish sauces, so especially in the southern part of Italy and of Europe. And sometimes there are meat sauces, but generally they are vegetarian sauces. And I thank you for your attention. I'd like to thank also Marianne and Peter Ellis and Gabriele Riccardi and all of you. Thank you.